the binding triad. And now let us consider the way weighted voting will enable the UN to make better decisions that can be fully implemented, because the votes going into the decisions will represent the real power of the different member countries. And let us also see why weighted voting will safely and fairly empower the General Assembly to provide solutions for global problems and only global problems. What are global problems? Today, peace and pollution are universally recognized as global problems. Some believe that in the near future, poverty may be added to that list. Dick Hudson, founder of the Center for War Peace Studies, designed the binding triad. For a period of 15 or 20 years, board members held meetings with ambassadors and members of mission staffs. The reaction was rarely more than polite. Things began to change during 2003 because of the Secretary General's call for radical change and because several other efforts at fundamental reform were unsuccessful. At a meeting in the spring of 2005 with a legal counselor at the Canadian mission, we were told that the message we had just delivered should be taken to the key foreign ministries. The counselor explained that ambassadors at the UN and their staffs are simply messengers. He urged that the weighted voting concept should be explained at the respective foreign ministries directly to the person making recommendations to the foreign minister on matters of UN reform. That is the task we have been engaged in since early March 2006. The Group of 77 Developing Nations was organized in 1964 to enhance their joint negotiating capacity. The Group of 77, known as the G77, and China now include 132 nations. Careful analysis leads us to conclude that nothing can be accomplished regarding UN reform unless it originates with the G77. This year, South Africa holds the presidency of the G77, and so South Africa was at the top of our list. Here is the message that we are presenting at the UN missions and at the key foreign ministries. We deal with both the binding triad plan, which we think is best for the General Assembly, and the Schwartzberg proposal, which we consider best for the Security Council. The presentation we make is clear and simple. We are here today at your mission first to explain the concept of weighted voting and then to ask for your assistance in making an appointment for us at your foreign ministry. Our letter requesting today's meeting listed the topic as additional power for the General Assembly as the world's legislature. It explained that we were writing at the suggestion of Mr. Fadel Nasserodian of the Foreign Ministry in Pretoria, South Africa. It continued, a recent example of the General Assembly crisis took place, you will recall, on April 28, 2006. 108 members of the Group of 77, together with China, voted to table major parts of the Secretary General's blueprint for UN management reform. The U.S. led 50 nations that voted against the tabling motion. The G77 explained that the major reason for its negative vote was the perception that the proposed reforms are part of a larger strategy by the major donor states, primarily the U.S., to assure tighter control of the UN internally. The U.S. responded that absent top-to-bottom management reform, the UN will continue to be ill-equipped to meet the current demands that we, as member states, place upon the organization. We, the ambassadors for weighted voting, see merit in both positions. There is a solution which can satisfy both the G77 and the major donor nations. Since 1945, the General Assembly has been envisioned as the world's legislature, but it still has no authority other than to manage the internal operations of the UN. It has no international power because its voting system does not reflect reality. To become the UN's legislature, the General Assembly must have a system of representation that will not only reflect the sovereign equality of each member, but also the wide differences among the members in population and financial strength. An historical example taken from U.S. history may be useful to make the point. At Philadelphia in 1787, the big states, New York and Virginia, both had very large populations. They argued that representation must be based on population. The states that had small populations, such as Delaware and Rhode Island, argued that representation in Congress must be based on equality of the 13 sovereign states. The Connecticut Compromise solved that problem of legislative representation with a bicameral Congress. Today, the General Assembly does not need a House based on population and a Senate where each member state has the same number of senators. But the General Assembly does need an equitable weighted voting plan that will reflect not only sovereignty and population, but also a state's financial contribution to the UN budget. Weighted voting is used in different forms in all international financial and certain other specialized organizations. In some, it is based on population, and in others, it is based on monetary contributions. The recently adopted Peace-Building Commission is weighted in its representation according to who contributes the money, who contributes the armed forces, as well as other factors. General Assembly decisions utilizing the binding triad would still be made with a single vote, but with 3 simultaneous ways of counting that vote. A computer would instantaneously report whether the resolution had the required majority on each of the 3 legs. The first leg reflects sovereignty. This will give real international power to each of the 192 member states for the first time. It would require 2/3 of the states present and voting. The second leg reflects population. It would require support of nations representing an agreed-upon majority of the world's population. China, India, Indonesia, Nigeria, and other populous states would certainly approve. The third leg reflects financial and military strength. It would also require nations representing the agreed-upon majority of contributions to the UN budget. The US, Japan, and Germany should certainly be pleased. The size of the required majorities on the population leg and on the money leg, such as 51% or more, would be negotiated in committee before the plan would be presented to the General Assembly for a final vote. The binding triad would not deprive the General Assembly of its present power to pass non-binding resolutions by the one-member, one-vote system. Likewise, the General Assembly's one-member, one-vote control over the internal affairs of the UN would be retained. The binding triad also provides that no member state would have a vote of more than 15% on either the population or the contribution leg of the triad. On the population leg, China would be limited to 15% despite its having 20% of the world's population. On the monetary leg, the US, which contributes 22%, and Japan, which contributes 19%, would be limited to 15%.